Hello and welcome to CGTN Africa's pre-Kenyan election 2017 coverage. Now today behind me we're going to be finding statistics on the touchscreen that come from the latest Ipsos opinion poll. Now this will be our go-to guide of how we feel that Kenyans may be feeling in the run-up to this election. Now my name is Oliver Jarvis and joining me in the studio is Dr. Tom Wolfe. He is an Ipsos lead research analyst. Now Dr. Tom will be giving a sort of subtle breakdown of what we can be seeing from these results and how we can interpret them. So Dr. Tom, could you please just give us a breakdown of your political survey experience?
I did come to Kenya first as a teacher 50 years ago and have lived here for nearly 40 years now, off and on. Understand why there's such an appetite for politics among the Kenyan public, and that's why the Kenyan media, and as well as the international media, especially when we're approaching such an important event as this election, are interested in the kind of work that we do and that several other survey firms do also.
We understand this was a huge survey. Can you just tell us how many people you interviewed?
I would say it was a sufficiently large survey to get reliable data in statistical terms at the national level. We aimed for 2,000 respondents distributed over the Kenyan landscape according to population distribution using data from the Kenyan National Bureau of Statistics. We select our respondents for interviews based on a listing which is done in each household of everyone who is 18 and over.
What is the relationship between an opinion poll and the election outcome?
We've seen in certain parts of the world where surveys by firms, including our own company, such as the Brexit vote in the UK, got it wrong. There were people who were shy for one reason or another in honestly answering questions, in that case whether they wanted the United Kingdom to leave the European Union. But on the strong side for us in Kenya, we have two things going for us. Number one, based on past research, we find Kenyans are pretty honest about most questions. We find that because all of our surveys, or at least ones like these you're presenting the results of today, are done, as I said, at the household level, face to face, in an interview that can take 45 to 60 minutes. Kenyans want to make their voices heard, and I think this is something we have to remember, that keeping in mind that from 1969 until 1992, when Kenyan law and the Constitution only allowed for a single political party, Kenyans since 1992 have been, and up to today, are still celebrating the freedom of what they call their multi-party democracy. And even if polls of the kind that I do only really took off with the 1997 election, they are considered by Kenyans as part of the freedoms that they're now enjoying. And that's why many Kenyans, as well as politicians, will often be unhappy with the results. But they have never tried to stop us from doing our work. But we're doing what we can with our resources and with the cooperation of Kenyans who, as I say, are most cooperative in allowing us to produce the results we do.
Let's look at the statistics that we've got from this. Now, it's bearing in mind we've actually picked out the areas that we feel the necessary to discuss. So if I just touch the screen here, we'll see coming up is, during the last 3 months, have the general economic conditions for you and your family. Now green is improved, red worsened, and blue is stayed the same. Now as you can see, red is resoundingly huge here. 76% of the people that were interviewed believe that the economic conditions have worsened. Now of course this is subjective, but interestingly in Jubilee supporters, 72%. Now this has got me thinking, could that 72% potentially be thinking, hang on a minute, let's vote for someone else here if it's not going the right way?
Well, that's a very good question. First, I should say that this survey was conducted in the middle of May. I believe our last day of interviews was the 23rd, so that's 5-6 weeks ago now. We have another survey in the field now, and it'll be interesting to see if these numbers change. What was going on? We had basically two seasonal periods of rain in Kenya, which had largely failed. We've had not just a shortage of many basic foodstuffs, but even for many that are available, a big rise in prices. So cost of living has been skyrocketing. I think for the month of April, inflation was in double digits for the first time in several years, according to the government's own economic survey. There was also one or more serious labor strikes. The doctors were on strike. So a number of things that were happening that were affecting people's households' economy. Should that give the government pause for worry that those people, at least between now and the election of August and 8th, might say, if our conditions are worsening, maybe we should give the opposition a chance? And also in the political class who've asked the same question that you have. Simply saying that you're unhappy about something doesn't necessarily mean that a different leadership would inspire more confidence than the one that you have at the moment. So in order to contemplate moving your political allegiance from where you are now, not only requires that you're unhappy with it, but also that you think the alternative would make things better for you.
So if we just go on now, I mean, the trend graph you were talking about is here. Now, we can see that worsened has stayed, sorry, I should say this is over the last 5 years, and worsened has consistently been on top. What's drawn my eye is the 76% in May 2017. Now, what's that all about?
The record-breaking inflation rate, cost of living, shortage or even absence of basic foodstuffs. Those are the things that affect families the most. Also, although we've had a lot of infrastructure development in Kenya, especially in the last year or two, and you'll notice that going back 5 years, June was just after 2013, the March 2013 election. So these results basically track the public's view of their own situation during the period in which this incumbent government has been there. I think that those factors I mentioned largely explain this big increase since even January.
But we're going to go on here quickly because in the next slide we see that once again people are thinking it's going in the wrong direction. Now my question, a little similar to the one before, but you've mentioned these factors. Now do people see this as the government's fault? Or is this external factors like climate change, for example? Are they pointing their finger at the current government?
Now, what is interesting and what is giving you a kind of a hint to the answer of your previous question, maybe I should ask you the question. We had 72% of supporters of the current government in the last slide saying their personal economic or family household conditions had gotten worse in the last 3 months. But only half of them, quite a bit fewer, 52%, are saying the country's going in the wrong direction. That tells you that aside from economic conditions, there are other things in their mind that they're thinking of when they're answering such a question.
It reminds me of a quote. It's almost like night is darkest before dawn. So they see the economy going down, but in the next slide we allude to infrastructure as an important thing. Maybe they're seeing that as the next
And also of political relevance. Whereas you saw in the previous slide, or the previous but one, that there was only a 7-point gap between supporters of the government and the opposition in terms of how bad their household economic conditions were. Here it's nearly double.
Yeah, it's huge.
I mean 39% from 52 to 91. So you can see that on both sides of the political divide, there are non-economic issues that people are taking into account. And in addition to cost of living that I mentioned, there are governance issues such as corruption, insecurity, and issues such as that are feeding in to these figures.
I wanted to allude to the fact that region to region is so very different. Now Central, although people think it's going in the wrong direction, it's more of a race. There's more, there's more competition there.
Statistically, it's a tie.
Yes. But you, of course, for the error margin, but if you
That's right.
stretch all the way to Nyanza, now, why is there such an imbalance there? Can you just explain more about that?
The three areas on the right side of the screen that have the highest figures of wrong direction, these are the stronghold areas of Kenya's political opposition, both as expressed in the current parliament and in terms of other data from the survey in terms of expressed voting intentions in next month's election. The question that is derived from this one is really, to what extent are people's feelings about the country's direction based on what we would call objective material facts, and what would the Kenya government have to do in order to, if not eliminate, but reduce that very great discrepancy that you suggest between the areas of the country where his party has its strongest support and those in the opposition. So this takes us back to the kind of never-ending question, not just in Kenyan politics, but in much of African politics, and indeed in many parts of the world. How much of political alignment is based on identity as opposed to performance?